Hi.
Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting here, but I don't know what else to do. My whole life just fell apart, and I feel like a complete fool. I need to get this off my chest. So, my wife, Claire, and I have been married for 22 years. We met in London, where I was born and raised. She, on the other hand, grew up on a small, remote island off the north coast of Cornwall. We had a solid life in the city, good jobs, good friends, the usual. But Claire always talked about how much she missed the island, how she felt trapped in the chaos of London, how she longed for a simpler life. I resisted at first. I love the city, and I had my whole life here. But she was persistent, and after years of talking about it, I finally gave in. Figured, why not? Maybe a quieter life could be good for us. Maybe it would bring us closer. We didn't have kids, just us two, and I thought stupidly that this would be a fresh start, a new adventure. We moved 6 months ago, and from day one something felt off. The island was beautiful, don't get me wrong, cliffs, rolling green hills, the sea stretching endlessly. But the people, different story. I felt like an outsider immediately. They weren't outright hostile, but there was this coldness, like I didn't belong. When I walked into the local pub, conversations would quiet down. When I greeted people, I'd get short nods or forced smiles. Claire said it was just how islanders were, reserved, not used to newcomers. I tried to believe her, but then there were the whispers. I'd walk into a shop and hear murmurs that stopped as soon as I got close. The postman, an older guy named Harold, would give me these knowing looks whenever he handed me my letters. When I asked Claire about it, she'd laugh it off. Oh, they're just not used to having a Londoner around. But it wasn't just that. It felt personal, like they all knew something I didn't. Then there was her behavior. Claire was happier than ever, laughing more, staying out later, constantly visiting old friends. She'd go for long walks alone, saying she was catching up with the island. At first I thought, good for her, she's reconnecting. But then I started noticing little things. She was secretive with her phone. Before, she'd leave it anywhere. Now it was always in her pocket or face down on the table. She started having hushed conversations late at night, stepping outside when I walked into the room. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd just shrug and say, "Oh, just an old friend." I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just struggling with the transition. Then, one evening, I went up to the attic to grab some boxes, and that's when everything started to unravel. There, buried under a pile of old books, was a manuscript, handwritten, yellowed with age. The title? Tales from the Island. I sat down, flipped it open, and started reading. And that's when my stomach dropped. It was a collection of stories about the island's history, its old traditions, its hidden customs. Some of it was folklore, ghost stories, tales of shipwrecks. But then I hit a section that made my skin crawl. A passage about an ancient law from 1287. One that allowed the island's lord to sleep with any newlywed bride on her wedding night. My first reaction was disgust. But then I kept reading, and what I found next made me feel physically sick. The law had supposedly been abolished centuries ago. But, according to the manuscript, a secret tradition had taken its place, something more subtle but just as horrifying. Every year, on April Fool's Day, islanders would honor the past by swapping partners for one night. A celebration of community, they called it. A way to keep the island's spirit alive. I felt cold all over. I was about to close the book, tell myself it was just some old superstition, until I saw the last note, scribbled in shaky handwriting at the bottom of the page. Some traditions never truly die. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. And then, as if on cue, Claire walked into the attic. She saw me holding the manuscript, and for the first time since we moved here, she looked scared. Claire froze in the doorway. Her eyes flicked from my face to the manuscript in my hands, and for a second, just a second, she looked genuinely rattled. Then, just as quickly, she forced a smile. "Oh, that old thing?" She laughed, stepping forward like it was no big deal. "It's just a bunch of island myths. What are you doing digging through all this junk?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to piece things together. I held up the book. "Is this real?" My voice came out hoarse. She scoffed. Steve, come on. It's just folklore. You know how these old communities are. Full of weird traditions and ghost stories. She was lying. I could see it all over her face. I kept my eyes on her. And this whole April Fool's partner swap thing? I asked. That's just a ghost story too? She hesitated. A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe? Or guilt. Then she let out a dramatic sigh and sat down on an old trunk. All right, look, she said, rubbing her temples. It was a thing. A long time ago. But nobody does it anymore. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I remembered the way people looked at me in town. The whispers. The weird stares. I pressed on. Are you sure about that? Because ever since we moved here, I felt like there's something going on that I don't know about. She rolled her eyes. You're overthinking this, babe. Seriously. It's an island. People gossip, that's just how it is. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. I stood up. Then why did you look so nervous when you saw me reading this? That was when her mask slipped. Just for a second. Her lips tightened. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her jeans. And then, as if flipping a switch, she suddenly laughed. Oh my God, Steve, she said, shaking her head. You really think what? That I snuck off on April Fool's Day to sleep with some islander for tradition's sake? Seriously. I didn't answer, because now that she had said it out loud, I did think that. And judging by the way her face flushed, she knew it too. Claire was watching me closely now, like she was waiting to see if I'd swallow her excuse. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. She forced another laugh, but it sounded thin. Steve, come on. You're being ridiculous. Am I? I said quietly. I held up the manuscript. Because this doesn't sound like a joke. She groaned and rubbed her face like I was exhausting her. It's just an old island custom that doesn't happen anymore. You're acting like I've been sneaking around behind your back. I didn't break eye contact. Have you? Her whole body stiffened. Just for a second. Then she scoffed, standing up and crossing her arms. Oh my God, Steve. No. I can't believe we're even having this conversation. You're reading some ancient nonsense and suddenly turning it into a whole conspiracy about me cheating. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I wasn't stupid. So if it's all just myths, I said slowly, why did you look scared when you saw me reading it? Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. A flicker of panic flashed in her eyes before she masked it with frustration. I wasn't scared, she snapped. I was just surprised. I mean, you've never shown interest in island history before, and suddenly you're up here digging through ancient books like some detective. I stared at her. She was deflecting. Hard. All right, I said. Then tell me something. If this tradition is just a joke, why did the manuscript say, some traditions never truly die? Her jaw clenched. She looked away for the first time. I don't know, she muttered. I felt something twist in my gut, because Claire always had an answer for everything. She was quick, sharp-tongued, never at a loss for words. But now she looked cornered. Then, just as I was about to press her again, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. It was a text from an unknown number. You should ask Claire what she was doing last April Fool's. The blood drained from my face. And when I looked back up, Claire was watching me. She had seen the text. And for the first time since we moved here, she looked genuinely terrified. The attic was dead silent. Claire's eyes were locked on my phone, and I swear, for a second, she actually stopped breathing. I didn't even look at her. I just read the text again. You should ask Claire what she was doing last April Fool's. My hands felt cold. My stomach twisted. Who sent that? Claire's voice was sharp, but there was something else underneath. Panic. I looked at her, gripping my phone. That's what I'd like to know. She scoffed, but it wasn't convincing. Probably just some idiot messing with you. Small-town people love their drama. I turned the phone toward her. Then why do you look like you just saw a ghost? Her face dropped, just for a split second. Then she shook her head, letting out a forced laugh. Steve, this is crazy. You're letting some anonymous text freak you out? Come on, you know how these people are. I stared at her. My wife. The woman I had been with for 22 years. And for the first time, I didn't recognize her at all. I turned back to my phone, my heart pounding. Who sent this? The number wasn't saved in my contacts. I tapped it, but it was no use, just a random UK number. No name, no info, but someone knew something, and they wanted me to know it too. I swallowed hard. Claire, I said, keeping my voice calm, I'm going to ask you once, and I need you to tell me the truth. Her jaw tightened. Steve, what were you doing last April Fools? Her whole body went stiff. That was it. That was all the confirmation I needed. Because if she was innocent, she would have answered immediately. She would have laughed, rolled her eyes, reminded me of something completely normal we did that day. But instead, she hesitated. And then she did something I never expected. She lied. I don't remember, she said, too quickly. It was a year ago. A slow, cold anger started building in my chest. You don't remember? I repeated. Are you serious? She lifted her chin, crossing her arms. No, Steve, I don't. It was just a normal day. Nothing special. I kept my eyes on her. I could see it. The way her fingers twitched, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She was trying so hard to keep her cool, but she was cracking. I exhaled, shaking my head. You're lying. She glared at me. I am not. Yes, you are. I held up my phone. Because someone out there knows what you were doing last April Fools. And they thought I should know too. Her face drained of color. For the first time, she had no comeback. And in that moment, I knew. I knew my wife had done something unforgivable. Claire's face was pale. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. She looked like a kid caught stealing, desperate to come up with an excuse but coming up blank. I stepped closer, my grip tightening around my phone. Who sent this, Claire? How would I know? She snapped, too defensive, too fast. Then answer the question. I shot back. What were you doing last April Fools? She forced out a laugh, shaking her head. Steve, you're acting crazy. You're seriously going to trust some random text over me? Your wife. My stomach twisted. That's not an answer. I swallowed the anger bubbling up in my throat. Then prove it, I said. Tell me where you were. Walk me through the day. She hesitated again. Then she turned away, running a hand through her hair. I don't know, Steve. We had just moved here. I was probably out with friends, catching up. Do you expect me to remember every single day from a year ago? I narrowed my eyes. We moved here 6 months ago. Her whole body stiffened. And just like that, she knew she had messed up. A silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Claire still had her back to me, her fingers digging into her arms. And I realized something. She was stalling, trying to come up with something. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. You know what? I muttered. Forget it. I'll find out myself. That got her attention. She spun around, eyes wide. Steve, what does that mean? I turned my phone over in my hand. I mean, if you won't tell me the truth, someone else will. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. I stepped past her, heading for the attic door. My mind was racing. Who sent the text? What did they know? How deep did this go? And more importantly, was I about to uncover something that would destroy my marriage forever? Behind me, Claire whispered something under her breath. I almost didn't hear it, but I did, and it made my blood run cold. I never wanted you to find out. I stopped dead in my tracks. Slowly, I turned back to face her. What did you just say? She clamped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, panicked, like she had just realized what she let slip. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took a step toward her. What did you just say? She shook her head wildly. Nothing. I didn't mean, Steve, please, you're blowing this out of proportion. But I wasn't listening anymore, because at that moment I knew. My wife had betrayed me, and I was about to find out how. I stared at her, my whole body rigid. Claire looked like she wanted to take the words back, but it was too late. I never wanted you to find out. That wasn't something you say unless there's something to find out. The air between us was thick with tension. My hands curled into fists, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to hold myself together. I took a deep breath. Tell me, right now, what did you mean by that? She shook her head rapidly, stepping back like she needed space. Steve, I didn't mean it like that. You're twisting my words. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, I'm twisting your words? Claire, you just admitted you were hiding something. Her eyes darted around the attic, like she was looking for a way out. Then she straightened up, and the lies started coming. I just meant that I knew you'd get weird about the island's history, she stammered. I didn't want you reading that stupid manuscript and getting all paranoid. That's what I meant. I shook my head. That's not what you meant, and you know it. Steve, come on. She threw her hands in the air. You're getting worked up over nothing. It was just a stupid tradition. Okay? Nobody does it anymore. It's just some ancient custom that... Then why did someone text me about it? I cut her off, holding up my phone. She froze. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. That was it. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just hiding something. She was terrified I was about to find out. I turned on my heel and marched out of the attic. Where are you going? She demanded, hurrying after me. To find someone who will actually tell me the truth. I didn't know where I was heading at first. Maybe to the pub, maybe to one of her old friends. But as I stomped down the stairs, my phone buzzed again. Another text. Meet me behind the boathouse at 9 p.m. I'll tell you everything. No name, no explanation. But I didn't need one. I knew whoever this was, they had the answers Claire wouldn't give me. Behind me, Claire grabbed my arm. Steve, stop. You're making a mistake. I turned to her, my stomach churning. No, Claire. The mistake was ever trusting you. Her face crumbled. But I didn't care. I just walked out the front door. Because at this point, I needed the truth, no matter how bad it was. The sun had set by the time I made my way down to the boathouse. The wind howled off the cliffs, the kind of sharp, biting cold that cut straight through my jacket. The island was eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath. I checked my phone. 8:57 p.m. Whoever sent the texts was about to show up. I stood in the shadows, heart hammering. I kept replaying the last few hours in my head. Claire's nervous fidgeting, her panicked eyes, the way she tried to lie but couldn't keep her story straight. And that slip-up. I never wanted you to find out. She was hiding something. I just didn't know how bad it was yet. Then, footsteps. I tensed, squinting through the darkness. A figure emerged from the side of the boathouse, pulling up their hood against the wind. I stepped forward. Are you the one who texted me? The person hesitated, then nodded. As they moved closer, the moonlight hit their face. It was Harold, the postman. My stomach twisted. Of all the people on the island, I never would have guessed him. He was always quiet, polite, but now, up close, he looked tense. Like this meeting was as much a risk for him as it was a revelation for me. You got my messages? He asked in a hushed voice. I nodded, suddenly unsure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. What's going on? Harold exhaled, shoving his hands deep into his coat pockets. Listen, I don't have much time. If they find out I told you anything. He shook his head. Doesn't matter. You need to know the truth. A chill ran down my spine. About what? He hesitated. Then, Claire, and what she did last April Fool's. My mouth went dry. Tell me. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing over his shoulder. You've read about the island's traditions, right? I nodded. Harold's jaw tightened. Well, they never really stopped. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My whole body went rigid. What? I choked out. Harold lowered his voice. People don't talk about it openly. It's not like the old days where it was forced. But some families, the old island families, still honor it in secret. They see it as preserving history. He paused. Claire's family is one of them. I felt sick. Harold continued, his voice grim. Every year, certain couples, only those from island bloodlines, are expected to take part. They call it keeping the island strong. I shook my head, my mind refusing to accept what he was saying. No, Claire would have told me. She would have. She didn't tell you because she knew you'd never agree, Harold interrupted. That's why she waited until you were away. My breath caught. What? He looked me dead in the eye. Last April Fool's, you were on the mainland, right? I froze. My mind raced back. Last year, around that time, I had gone to London for 3 days to visit an old friend. Claire had insisted she couldn't come. Said she had things to do on the island. And now I knew why. I swallowed, my throat burning. Who? I whispered. Who was she with? Harold shifted uncomfortably. I don't know all the details. But I do know this, it wasn't just one person. My stomach dropped. Everything around me blurred. The wind, the crashing waves, the distant lights of the village. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears. Harold kept talking, but his words barely registered. I shouldn't be telling you this. If the others find out, I'll be in trouble. But you deserve to know. He hesitated, then added, You're not the first outsider this has happened to, and you won't be the last. I took a step back, my hands shaking. Claire, my wife, she had done this. On purpose. She had lied to me. She had let me move here, knowing damn well what this island was hiding. And now I had to decide what to do next. I don't remember walking home. 1 second, I was standing behind the boathouse, my stomach twisted in knots. The next, I was in our kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Claire was sitting at the table, arms crossed, looking like she had been waiting for me. Her leg bounced. A nervous tick she only got when she was lying. The moment our eyes met, she knew. You talked to someone, she said, her voice tight. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Steve, she sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know what you think you heard, but this is getting ridiculous. I clenched my jaw. Then tell me the truth, she scoffed. I already did. No, you didn't. I stepped forward, slamming my phone onto the table. I know what happened last April Fool's, Claire. For the first time, she flinched. I saw it, the microsecond of pure panic before she forced a bitter laugh. You don't know anything. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You waited until I was gone. You planned it. Her eyes darted to the side. That's not true. You were with someone, I said through gritted teeth. No, not just someone. Multiple people. Her whole body tensed. That was it. That was the moment. She knew I knew. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. I could see the gears in her head turning, searching for a way out. Then, instead of denying it, she laughed. Cold, humorless laugh. One that sent a shiver down my spine. Oh my God, Steve. She leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. You are so predictable. I blinked. What? She crossed her arms. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I just thought it would take longer. My stomach churned. So it's true. She smirked, like she had won some kind of game. Steve, I'm from here. You're not. You'll never understand how things work. My hands curled into fists. That's your excuse? She tilted her head. It's not an excuse. It's reality. I felt like I was going to be sick. Who was it? Her eyes darkened. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. I snapped, slamming my hands onto the table. It matters because we've been married for 22 years, Claire, and you threw that away for some disgusting island tradition? She didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled. You wouldn't understand, she whispered. And in that moment I realized I never really knew my wife at all. I stood there, staring at her. This woman I had spent 22 years with, who was now looking at me like I was the idiot for not knowing. You wouldn't understand, she had said. I felt something inside me snap. Then make me understand, I said, my voice low. Tell me why. Tell me who. Claire sighed dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying me like she was deciding how much to say. Then finally, "Steve, this island has traditions that go back centuries," she said, slow and deliberate. "It's not about cheating. It's about preserving our roots." My stomach twisted. "Preserving our roots?" I echoed. "That's your excuse? That's what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" She rolled her eyes. "It's not an excuse. It's just how things are. You're an outsider, Steve. You were never supposed to know." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "So that's why you pushed for us to move here? So you could go back to what? To some ritual where you sleep around behind my back?" She smirked. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic." I stared at her in pure disbelief. "Dramatic? You act like I ran off with some stranger," she scoffed. "It wasn't like that." A cold chill crawled up my spine. "Then who was it?" She hesitated, just for a second. And that's when I knew it was someone I knew. "Tell me," I demanded. She exhaled heavily, like she was so done with this conversation. Then, with a small, almost amused smile, she said, "You've met him." I felt my blood run cold. My mind raced. The island wasn't big. If it was someone I had met, then it had to be. And then it clicked. The stares. The whispers. The way some men in town always had the smug look when they saw me, like they knew something I didn't. Harold's words came rushing back. "You're not the first outsider this has happened to." I stepped back, shaking my head. "No." She tilted her head. "No, not just one," I whispered. "That's what Harold said. It wasn't just one person." Claire's expression didn't change. She just smiled. A slow, mocking smile. And that was when I finally saw her for who she really was. My wife. The woman I had loved for more than 2 decades. Was a liar, a manipulator, and worst of all, she wasn't even sorry. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My whole body went numb, but my mind was screaming. Claire just sat there, smirking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even trying to explain herself anymore. She knew she had won. And I finally understood, this wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't some drunken one-night stand. It wasn't something she regretted. She had planned this. She had waited until I was gone. She had followed some sick, twisted island tradition and thrown away our marriage like it was nothing. I forced myself to speak. "So that's it." My voice sounded hollow. "You're just admitting it?" Claire tilted her head, amused. "What else can I do? You already made up your mind, didn't you?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, don't act like I'm the crazy one here, Claire. You did this. You made the choice." She sighed, shaking her head. "Steve, I'm not the only one. This is just how things are here. You never would have understood. So why should I have told you?" I clenched my jaw. "Because I'm your husband." She shrugged, like that word meant nothing. My hands shook with rage. "How many?" She raised an eyebrow. "How many what?" "You know what." My voice was dangerously low. Her lips curled into a slow smile. "Would knowing make you feel better?" That was it. That was the moment I lost every ounce of love I had for this woman. I grabbed the manuscript, the one that started all of this, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud thud, pages flying everywhere. Claire didn't even flinch. I turned back to her, my vision red. "Do you feel good about yourself?" I demanded. "Do you feel proud?" She exhaled through her nose, standing up slowly. "I feel like you're overreacting." I laughed, because what else was there to do? Then suddenly she softened, put on a new face. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Steve, we've been married a long time. Don't throw everything away over one misunderstanding." I snapped my head up. "One." She smiled sweetly. "We can work through this." And that was when I saw it. She actually thought she could manipulate me into staying. I took a deep breath, forcing every emotion down. Then I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "We're done." For the first time, Claire's smirk vanished. Her mouth opened slightly. "Steve, don't be stupid." I grabbed my keys, my coat, my phone. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from her. But as I reached the door, she said something that made my blood freeze. Her voice was soft, almost taunting. "Where will you go, Steve?" I turned back, heart hammering. She smiled again, that cruel, knowing smile. "This is an island," she said. "You have nowhere to run." Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "This is an island. You have nowhere to run." I gripped the doorknob so hard my knuckles went white. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. She was right. Where was I going to go? The last ferry to the mainland had left hours ago. There were no hotels, no real places to stay unless I wanted to sleep in my car. And even if I did, who could I trust here? The whole island had been in on it. The whispers, the stares, the smug looks from certain men. They all knew, and none of them had warned me. I turned back to Claire. She was standing there, arms crossed, watching me like I was some cornered animal. I hated her. I had never felt this kind of rage before. This deep, burning hatred for the person I had loved for over 2 decades. And she knew it. "Move," I said, my voice tight. She raised an eyebrow. "Or what?" I clenched my fists. I wasn't going to play her game. I yanked the door open and stepped outside. The wind was sharp, the salty air stinging my skin. The village was quiet, too quiet. A few lights flickered in the distance, but I knew people were awake, watching, waiting. I didn't care. I stomped down the steps, pulling my phone out to check the next ferry schedule. Morning. First one leaves at 6:30 a.m. That gave me about 9 hours. 9 hours trapped on this island with her. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't go to the pub, too many people. Couldn't go to Harold, he had already risked enough. Then it hit me. The car. If I could make it through the night, I could drive straight to the docks at dawn and get the hell off this cursed rock. Behind me, I heard the door creak open. "You're being ridiculous, Steve," Claire called out, her voice light, almost amused. "Where are you going? To sleep in the car like some runaway teenager?" I ignored her and kept walking. I heard her sigh dramatically. "Fine, be like that." Then, just as I reached the car, she called out one last thing. "They're going to come looking for you, you know?" I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. And it wasn't her smile. Not the smile I had known for 22 years. This was something else. Something darker. "They don't like when people try to leave," she said softly. "Especially not after learning our little secrets." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I opened the car door, slid inside, and locked it. I didn't know if she was bluffing. I didn't know if this was just another sick mind game. But one thing was certain. I wasn't safe here. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. Just make it to morning, I told myself. Just make it to the ferry. But deep down, a terrifying thought crept in. What if they don't let me? I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. My breath came out in short, uneven bursts. Just make it to morning. That was my only thought. If I could last until 6:30 a.m., I could get on that ferry and never look back. Never see Claire's smug face again. Never set foot on this cursed island. But her words wouldn't leave my head. "They're going to come looking for you." I glanced around. The village was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like there were eyes everywhere, behind curtains, behind darkened windows. Waiting. The wind howled outside, rocking the car slightly. I checked my phone, low battery. Great. For percent left. I should have charged it before I left the house. But I hadn't exactly planned on running for my life tonight. I locked the doors, but I knew that wouldn't do much if someone really wanted to get in. I wasn't safe here. Then, in the distance, footsteps. I snapped my head up, heart hammering. A shadow moved between the houses. Then another. And another. Panic clawed at my chest. My breathing got heavier. They weren't heading toward the pub, or any of the homes. They were coming straight for me. I didn't think, I just acted. I turned the key in the ignition. The car sputtered. Stalled. "No, no, no," Come on, I muttered, twisting the key again. The engine coughed to life. I threw it into reverse, tires screeching against the gravel. My headlights caught them. 3 men. One of them I recognized, Tom, the butcher. The other 2, I wasn't sure. But they all had the same expression. Cold. Amused. Like this was all a game to them. Tom took a step forward, raising a hand. Like he was expecting me to stop. I didn't. I floored it. The car shot backward, and I yanked the wheel, skidding onto the main road. My heart was pounding, hands shaking. I needed to hide. Somewhere they wouldn't look. The docks were too far. The village was crawling with people I couldn't trust. Then it hit me. The cliffs. If I could get to the high ground, I could wait it out until sunrise. No one would follow me there in the dark. I gritted my teeth and sped toward the cliffs, tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror I saw them, standing in the middle of the road, watching me, not running, not chasing, just watching, like they already knew how this night was going to end. The road was rough, the car jolting as I sped toward the cliffs. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel too tight. Almost there, just a little further. I stole a glance in the mirror. They weren't following. That should have made me feel better. Didn't. The way they stood there, just watching. Like they didn't need to chase me. Like they already knew what would happen next. I reached the cliffs and killed the engine. The wind howled, salt and cold biting at my face as I stepped out. I checked my phone. 2% battery. No signal. I cursed under my breath and shoved it into my pocket. I just had to make it to sunrise. But then a sound behind me. A soft crunch of gravel. I spun around. Nothing. Just the open road stretching back toward the village. Empty. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Somewhere in the dark, someone was watching. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd make it to morning at all. The wind roared, but underneath it, another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. I turned in every direction. Nothing. Just darkness and the endless drop of the cliffs behind me. I swallowed hard. Who's there? My voice barely carried over the wind. Silence. Then a whisper. Close. Too close. You shouldn't have asked questions. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, but no one was there. Then, from the darkness, I heard it, more footsteps. Coming closer. I backed up, heart pounding. Then I felt it, the edge. Loose gravel crumbling beneath my heel. And in that moment I realized I had nowhere left to run. The wind howled, the cliff's edge crumbling beneath my feet. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice. Low, calm, too close. It's better this way, Steve. My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. I turned my head slowly. Claire. She stood just a few feet away, her hair whipping in the wind, her expression eerily calm. Like this was always how it was supposed to end. I opened my mouth, but she stepped forward. One step, then another. I took a shaky breath. Why? She tilted her head, smiled. Because you don't belong here. Then she lunged. I stumbled back. My foot slipped. The world tilted. And then, darkness.